Hello guys, this is your friend from ninjavibeZ and we are back with a new fanfic, which is What If Naruto Was Banished and Returned as the Uzumaki Emperor with a Genturi Queen Part 2. And if you enjoy this fanfic, then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. Fire Country Hogue's office. Alright, start from the beginning again, please. Sununade rubbed her eyes, feeling her stress building. Naruto and that girl with him. Yugo, I think her name was, were able to match Itachi and Kisame blow for blow throughout the entire confrontation. Their teamwork was brilliant. They covered each other's weaknesses perfectly, making sure neither of them took any potentially fatal damage, Jiraiya explained in a reporting tone. What level would you say they're at? The Hokage asked, knowing the council would just love this news. Sannin easily borderline low Kage if they were to use those sage modes of theirs. The GMA Sinan mused. Sage mode, where'd they get them from? Tsunade asked, narrowing her eyes at her former teammate. Well, we know they signed summoning contracts with the Kitsun and the Nekomata, so probably from them, Jiraiya answered. You know, all summoners have their own versions of Sage Mode once they reach a certain level. Excuse me, what's Sage Mode? Sakura asked, never having heard of it before in all her years of studying under the Hokage. Jiraiya looked at her for a moment before explaining. I suppose you could call it a rite of succession for becoming a sage. A summoned race like the Toads, for example, are able to give their summoners a means to increase their overall abilities. And once a sage mode is triggered would signify a new sage being born. Each summoning contract has a different set of skills and abilities. Not to mention the risk involved in each one. Risk? Sakura asked, slightly worried. Well, depending on the sage mode, it could very well end up backfiring and harming its user or worse. That's the reason I didn't teach it to Nar during our 3 years away. If I did, he might have turned into a toad statue, explained the GMA Sinan before he pointed his thumb at the Hokage. Hers grants her the ability to heal from just about anything, making her virtually unkillable for as long as it's active. It's a more stable and powerful version of her Kyutsu. Most of the room's occupants seemed surprised at this. Mine grants me access to a set of jutsu called senjutsu and physical strength far surpassing that of any normal man. Like I said, it boosts a person's power 100-fold, putting you on par with a Kage. When Surby-sensei used his monkey sage mode, he was once able to fight off the other 4 Kages by himself. And because of his unmatched strength, he was nicknamed the God of Shinobi. Added, yeah, the old pervert was invincible. He could decimate an entire army by himself in a matter of minutes, rivaling that of Minato's raw power with his Horizon no Jutsu. Jiraiya grinned, remembering the many battles his sensei had gotten in during the wars. What about you, Kakashi-sensei? You've got a dog summoning contract, right? Sakura asked, remembering seeing her sensei summon before. The copy nin nodded and replied simply, I was unable to complete the training to become an Enuzin because of my sharing eye. It interfered with the sage mode activation process. Hara and Tsunade nodded in agreement. Of course, since the sharing bloodline is not a part of your regular DNA, it couldn't work properly. Kakashi sighed, still reading his orange book, it can't be helped. What about you guys? Sensei Tenten asked, remembering the man also had a summoning contract. I also have a summoning contract with the tortoises, but I turned the offer down wanting to be a taijutsu specialist. Guy answered truthfully. Anyway, even if I were to use my Toad Sage mode, I think even I would be hard-pressed to defeat either of them now. I'd be able to win. Don't get me wrong, but that would only be because I have more experience than either of them. The GMA Sinan finished. I'll tell you right now, facing them both together would be utter suicide, even for me. Very well. You're all dismissed until further notice. Sununade sighed and the retrieval team bowed before leaving with only Jiraiya remaining. Is something wrong? On our way back to Konoha, I stopped by one of my spy circles. They've found a lead on Akatsuki's base of operations and their leader. I'm going to go and check it out. Whirlpool Country. Unknown location. They had been traveling for 3 full days before they finally reached their destination. The island was massive, surrounded on all sides by hundreds of small whirlpools, preventing any access by ship. Fortunately, both of the Toad Princes were able to ferry the 2 blondes to the island, though they were exhausted by the end of it. Though Gamatsu was more than happy when he got given some candy, the 2 summoned creatures had decided to stick around, wanting to continue on with them. As the group proceeded inland, the 4 had begun training themselves whenever they stopped, but kept on guard should they find anything dangerous. The island, however, was nothing like they had thought it was. The forests, the fields, hell, even the ground itself looked and felt dead. What is this? Yugito asked, looking around at the silent forest they stood in. Everything here is dead, said Nar. There's no life anywhere. Gamakichi spoke in a saddened tone, examining the ground. What could have done this? I think I might have an idea, Naruto answered. Kaobi, if you can hear me, then do you mind explaining? After a few moments of silence, it was clear he was not going to get an answer. Let's keep moving. The group walked for another 30 minutes before something odd happened. Yugo hit an invisible wall and fell down. Ow, she winced, covering her nose. What the hell just happened? You all right? Nar asked, helping her up. Yeah, but I think I just walked into something, she answered, checking to see if there was any blood. There's nothing there, Yugo, the Kitsen-sen told her, looking at where she was walking. I'm telling you something's there. She growled in frustration. Air Nar Gamakichi asked, seemingly tapping the air itself. That's solid. Putting up his hand, Naruto touched whatever it was, feeling a seemingly invisible flat surface in air. Is that a genjutsu? It would have dispelled if it were. I think it's a barrier. Yugito told him. Nar nodded. All right, let's see if we can crack it. And how do we do that? Asked the elder Toad Prince. The newly nicknamed God of Flash just grinned like a fox by blasting it with everything we have, of course. Hey, Gamatsu. He turned to the yellow toad. How about we test out that new jutsu we've been working on? The younger Toad Prince smiled widely and nodded, turning to where the barrier was. Whenever you're ready. Yugo, Gamakichi, get behind us, Naruto ordered, and the 2 followed it. Gamatu charged himself full of chakra and inhaled a large amount of water vapor from the air, liquefying it in his mouth. All right, let's do this. Nar charged chakra to his hand, merging it with Gamatsu's, and pressed his hand to the toad's back. Now, Futon Gamma, he called out as the younger toad let loose a massive blast of water from his mouth in a stream. The blast hit the invisible barrier with tremendous force and sprayed across the entire area until a rather loud sound of glass shattering echoed through the countryside. As the mist cleared, structures could clearly be seen, most of which were ruins, but there were a few that were still standing, like a certain tower in the center, which could be seen even at their distance. If you don't need us anymore, Naruto, I think we'll be going. Dad's probably worried about us. Gamakichi spoke up, getting their attention. Yeah, we should be fine from here on out. Thanks for the help, guys. The Kitsen-Senan thanked. Anytime. Gamakichi waved before he disappeared in a poof of smoke. I'm hungry. Gamatsu wed before disappearing as well. Nar sighed before turning to his companion. Where are we going? When she nodded in reply, they continued on inside. This place is more like a graveyard than a hidden village. The Nico Sinan shivered as they walked down the street. That or a ghost town. Nar shivered when she said that. Please don't say that. You're not afraid of ghosts, are you, Nar? She asked slightly. And no, I'm not, he answered quickly, shaking his head. Right, she spoke in sarcasm as they continued walking. After a few minutes of walking through the deserted village, they arrived at the wall surrounding the tower like a barrier, taking notice that the entire place looked to be ready to collapse. Nice place for a vacation, huh? Even an idiot could tell she was being sarcastic. He didn't say anything to that, but instead jumped over the wall and spotted the entrance along with something else. She jumped down beside him a moment later and looked at what had made her partner stop. Right in front of the entrance was a small platform in the shape of a spiral. In its center, however, standing straight up in its pedestal was what caught their eye. It was a sword, a double-edged sword. She had never seen a weapon so beautiful in her life. The sword's handle was plated crimson, and the blade itself was an eerily silver with its edges seeming to shine in the daylight sun. Without a word, Nar stepped towards the platform and raises his hand to touch the sword when it suddenly seemed to pulse like it was alive. He jumped back as a ball of red light shot out from the handle and hovered before them. Some kind of booby trap? Yugo asked in thought as the two nins thought, get ready to fight if necessary. They didn't need to, however, as the light seemed to expand and brightened. They took note of a figure standing in the light. What is that? The light died down, revealing a long red-haired woman who looked about 25 years old, dressed in cage robes and wearing a light blue hat with the kanji for whirlpool written on it. She raised her head, revealing her face from under the wide hat. She was beautiful and seemed to radiate a sense of authority with a hint of childishness. The woman looked over at the two and her eyes widened at the teenage boy. Minato _ is that you? Nar took a step back when she reached out a hand towards him. Who are you? How do you know my father? The woman stopped at that and Yugito stared intently, trying to analyze the red-headed beauty. If you're here to take revenge or some crap on me to get back at Dad, then speak up before we kick your lady. Why, your father? But that would mean her eyes suddenly widened in recognition and she smiled at the boy's attitude. You're Nar. Answer the question. Who are you? Nar almost shouted, though his partner seemed to relax. That attitude. I used to be like that when I was younger. The woman removed her head and cleared the red hair from her face. My name is Uzumaki Kusha. I am the Nadim Ukage of Uzumaki Nasto and your mother. The two teens were left speechless. Was all the blonde male could get out before taking another step back. No, you can't be here. You're supposed to be dead. Naruto, the no Sinan said nervously, catching his attention. She's not really here. I can't sense anything from her. She's not real. I'll have you know I am very real. Kusha spoke in an annoyed tone before she grabbed the younger girl by the shoulders and smiled. See, but you have no life readings. I can't sense you, meaning you can't be alive. It's against the laws of nature. Yugito argued, still trying to find the woman's signature, but finding none. That's because I'm already dead. The redhead smiled sadly and put the girl down. She sighed and turned to the blonde boy. What you see now is nothing more than dust and echoes. She suddenly grabbed him and pulled him close. My, how you've grown, Naro. Can't breathe, Mom, he rasped out before she let go, letting him gasping for air. She waved her hand dismissively before turning to the blonde girl. Do I know you, miss? Yugito looked a bit embarrassed before she bowed and stated her name. Sorry, Uzumaki-sama. My name is Yugo. She's traveling with me. Nar stepped in. Kusha looked the girl over a few times before she sent a suspicious look at the fox boy. It appears you take after Minato-kun in more than just looks, Naru-chan. Both team blushed at that with Naruto's arms shaking in protest. We're not like that. Honest. Yahoo would want this guy. He's a total idiot. Yugito shouted, pulling on her fellow blonde's cheeks. I take great offense to that. Nar grumbled after she let go. Really good, she shouted happily, only making him pout more. Oh my. Kusha giggled at their antics. My mistake. Then after they had calmed down, they had fallen into silence until, are you really my mom? Are you really Uzumaki Kusha? Nar asked, staring at the woman intently. I am, but yet I'm not. It's hard to explain. I suppose you could say that the original Uzumaki Kusha was my creator. The redhead tried to clarify. What do you mean creator? Yugo asked, confused. Are you some kind of genjutsu? The older woman smiled and shook her head before explaining. I'm a copy of her. A shadow clone would be an adequate description. But unlike a shadow clone, I can last forever as long as I don't use chakra or complete or fail any order I am given. Order. What was the order your creator gave you? Yugo asked. Kusha just sighed before answering. The original Kusha created me so that if anything ever happened to her, then I'd act as a sort of last will. In testament, the two teens took a step back. Last will? Nar asked barely above a whisper. The redhead smiled. She used every trick she knew and more just in case. It was her greatest achievement and her last. Why? The Kitsen-sen asked, plagued with that single question. Kusha answered with a wide smile and her eyes closed because she left me to deliver a few words for the son she never saw. Mom. Nar didn't know what to say. Her image suddenly flickered. Oh dear, it appears I used more power than I thought. Kusha shook her head. It looks like I have less time than I would have liked, so I'll have to make this quick. Mom, can I ask you something? He asked. Of course, she replied. What do you wish to know? I want to know why Caillou attacked both Fire Country and Whirlpool Country. Nar asked, stated, surprising Yu-Gi-Oh! He never mentioned that, though. I didn't actually ask him why we're here. The blonde girl thought, looking between him and the now seemingly saddened copy of his mother. It's all our fault. She finally rasped out, meeting his gaze. Kobe attacked because it was trying to kill both Minato and I. The two teens stared at her surprised. Kobe was sent to kill us by his summoner while I was pregnant with Yun Nar. Wait, someone summoned the Kaili. As in the supposed walking natural disaster, Kobe no Kitsum. Yugo asked, completely freaked at this piece of information. Your eyes reek of a chakra far fouler than my own. It reminds me of Uchiha Ma. Nar grabbed a hold of the older woman's shoulders and asked in an almost frightened tone, what was the summoner's name? Please tell me. Kusha shook her head. I don't know. We never got his name. We didn't even see his real face. He always wore a mask. He let go of her and asked, where can I find him? She shook her head again and answered plainly. I don't know. But even if you did, you wouldn't be able to kill him or even touch him. He managed to hold his own against both Minato and I together. He saw through everything we did, and we could barely even touch him. He had some kind of defense that made him invulnerable to almost everything we threw at him. So, I guess even the Rinnegan wasn't enough. Naruto half asked Rasengan, how do you know about that jutsu? Redhead asked in surprise. The blonde boy just sighed and formed a ball of spinning chakra in his hand. Arozan taught it to me 3 years ago. Kusha just remained silent for a few moments with eyes wide before asking, you learned it 3 years ago. You look about 16. How long did it take you to master that jutsu? 3 weeks to learn it and another week to master. It wasn't even field tested until I shoved it in a bad guy's gut at the end of the final week. You should have seen the look on his face when I blasted him into a boulder. Naruto told her with a grin when he remembered how he won the necklace that was around his neck. Kusha herself and even Yugo were stunned at that. The Rasen was an A-ranked jutsu designed by the supposed strongest Hokage in history, which took him 3 years to create, and the Gamma-sen a full year to learn. For a child no older than 13 to master a jutsu of that level, and in the time he did, was unheard of by either of the two females. I must say that is surprising. Kusha finally managed to say, having recovered from what she had learned, and smiled at the boy. She sighed once again before continuing, knowing they were getting off of track anyway. Yes, even the Rasengan wasn't able to hit the guy, though Minato did manage to land a few blows with his experimental Rasengan. You mean an elemental one? Nar asked. She turned to him wide-eyed. How do you know about that? He seemed annoyed now. Well, let's see. I've been slugging around a futon Rasengan for just under 2 months since I was banished. It wasn't his fault, but he let slip a very dangerous piece of information in that sentence. You were what? Kusha exploded, grabbing his collar. What do you mean you were banished? As the saying goes, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned, especially from a redhead. Well, I was thrown out because I lost control of the furball a while back against Orochimaru and got one of my teammates injured. He saddened as he remembered his pink-haired former teammate. Kusha dropped him and looked away. They Minato, you idiot. She sent a punch at a nearby wall, causing it collapse from the impact. That stupid fool. I told him not to put too much faith in the people, but would he listen? No. She shook her head. I knew it. It wasn't bad enough. He split the seal in two, but he went and put his faith in the people again, only to have our son pay the price. It appeared Itachi was right. Nar did inherit his inability to keep his mouth shut from his mother. In the middle of her rant, she had mentioned one very important detail. Hey, what do you mean? My seal split it, too. Nar nearly shouted in surprise. The redhead stopped her rant and looked at him with a pale face. You heard that? She asked. He gritted his teeth in response loud and clear. Kusha gulped. Yeah, about the seal. It only contains and filters half of Kyobi's power and soul, so he is naturally evil all of the time. Excuse me, what the hell is that supposed to mean? It was Yugo that asked. After all, being the Ginuriki of the Queen of the Damned, you learned a few things about souls. One of which is knowing that you can't split a soul into good and evil. It's not possible. Separating a soul into good and evil creates instability. Why would you do something like that? It goes against the laws of nature. You can't have one without the other. So, why would you even attempt such a thing? Kusha scratched her head nervously before answering. Well, the only things that can hurt that masked guy were my sword, Minato's unstable, futon, Rasen, and highly condensed attacks like those from the Beiju. Sue wanted me to use it as a weapon just in case. Nar asked, thinking over what she had said. Kosa nodded in reply before explaining further. Yes, the seal can be completed once again if you were to summon the key toad Minato entrusted the key to. I think his name was Garatora. You do have the toad summoning contract, right? When he nodded, she continued, the key seal he holds is meant to restore the seal to maximum power and fuse the Kyobi back together into one being once more, allowing you to control more tails of power, though you can still be overloaded because of the pain involved. Wait, I can control more tails? He asked, stunned that little bit of information. Well, yes. In theory though, it would be up to you to control it. It's like a kunai in the aspect that if the wielder is not strong enough, the weapon will be nothing more than that, the redhead said knowingly. Speaking of weapons, she turned towards the sword lodged in the spiral pedestal. This weapon here was my personal sword, our family sword. Wait, I thought you said your sword could hit Kyobi's last summoner through his defenses. Is this it? Yugo asked, circling around the pedestal. Kusha nodded. It is the sword of the whirlpool and only ever wielded by the heir to the Uzumaki clan throughout each generation. She turned to Nar and smiled. This sword is the pride and joy of our clan. As the only remaining heir to the clan, it belongs to you, so treat it well. This sword is mine, asked the Kitsun Sinan as he stared at the blade. Kusha chuckled before nudging him towards the weapon. Go on, claim your inheritance. He stepped in front of the sword, looking down at its handle, seeing the light reflect off of it. Yugito watched with a small smile as he wrapped his hands around its hilt and in one quick motion pulled it out of the pedestal. A gust of wind whizzed through the area as two images appeared on the blade. On one side was the picture of a toad decked out in a long coat with a dagger in hand and a small smoking pipe in its mouth. On the other side was the image of a roaring orange fox with 9 tails. A light suddenly shot out from the sword and hit Yugo. For a moment, nothing happened until the light dimmed and a beautiful golden bow appeared in her hands with a spiral carved over the image of a cat with 2 tails engraved into the weapon. Before either of the two teens could say a word, both weapons disappeared in 2 flashes of lights each. They noticed that on the back of both of their right hands were storage seals in the shape of spirals. What just happened? The Kum Nin asked, looking at the back of her hand. I must be leaving now, I'm afraid. Good luck. Kusha smiled sadly but slightly hopeful at the two. Summon those weapons like you would any other with a few choice words and a little faith. Well, do that. Thanks, Mom. Nar clenched his fists as he watched the last legacy of his mother fade away from existence. I'll make you proud. You already have. And then she was gone. Faded away into memory, forever lost to the world of the living. After she had disappeared, Yugito looks from the spot the redhead stood towards her partner. So what will you do now? I want to leave. He finally answers, looking at his hand. There is nothing left for me here now. The no Sinan nodded and looked around. Where are we going? Nar thought about for a moment before he answered. I know exactly where we can go. Wave Country. Wave Country. Great Naruto Bridge. It had been 3 months since they had left Whirlpool Country after they had salvaged whatever they could from Uzugakur's ruins. They had mostly just found some scrolls on water elemental manipulation and a single water jutsu scroll. It wasn't really surprising since the country was surrounded by nothing but ocean, creating a natural defense against attacks. It would have been obvious that the country's former occupants would use the island's natural defenses to their advantage. Unfortunately, only Naruto could actually use the jutsu, since after Yugito had pretty much shoved a chakra elemental paper into his hands, he had discovered he had a water elemental affinity. Note, it's pretty obvious since his last names are Utsuaki and Namikaze. Both have a reference to water in some way. The two had set off towards Wave Country, but every time the two had stopped to sleep, Naro could always hear the faint sounds of sobbing coming from the other tent. Though he wouldn't admit it, it had him worried every time. When he asked Yugito about it, she would always say it was nothing and had continued to give that answer since the two had started traveling together 4 months ago. It still had him worried, though. Upon their arrival to Wave Country, however, they came across something they weren't expecting to see. What the heck is this? Yugo's voice could be heard for miles. In front of them was the large bridge connecting Wave Country to the mainland. There wasn't anything really wrong with it other than the fact it was extremely long, but its name is what caught the two travelers' attention. Its name printed on the archway above their heads stated quite clearly. Great Naruto Bridge. What the hell? She asked again, turning on heel to face her partner. Do you mind explaining, because I want an explanation? Well, you see, Nar laughed nervously. My old team and I might have saved this entire country from total annihilation. All right, then, why did they name the bridge after you? She asked, looking between him and the sign. He scratched the back of his neck in embarrassment. Well, I sort of sparked this country's courage and defeated one of the nins trying to destroy the peace here. Yugito frowned at that. She'd seen the reports on the Battle of Wave as the locals had been calling it, and so the rest of the world had come to know it as well. The report didn't match what Naruto had just said. What the report said was that Hideki Kakashi and Uchiha Sasaki had fought both Kirk cannons and won before finally moving on to Kilgado. It never mentioned anything about Naruto or the other teammate. Just Kakashi and Sasaki apparently saving the country of Wave. Once the two had crossed the bridge and entered village, Yugito had fully accepted that the mission report had been falsified. Is when they walked through the streets, children and adults alike stopped to stare in awe at them. More like him. These people are looking at him as if he were their hero. The report was definitely falsified. Probably to keep a lid on the demon's success, the no Senin thought bitterly, looking over at Naruto's smiling face. Hey, well, if it isn't the loudest ninja I ever met, they heard from in front of them. They looked up and saw a man who looked to be in his mid-60s standing in the middle of the street dressed formal wear befitting a man of authority. Welcome back, Brat Tazuna. You old drunk. How's it going? Nar waved, running up to the man with Yugito trailing a few feet behind. Same old, same old. I'm the mayor now, by the way, he said offhandedly before looking over to the nin. It's good to see you again. I heard what happened in Konoha. Nar looked away at that, trying to forget what had happened only 5 months ago. I'm surprised you heard about that. Are you kidding me? The entirety of the elemental countries knows that the son of the Yandi Hokage was exiled from his home just for being born. The aged man shook his head. Still can't believe you're that man's kid, though. Suna just laughed. Nevertheless, I never thought you'd show up here. Half the elemental countries have sent out hundreds of ninja to look for you. The Kitsen Senin laughed nervously. What were you expecting, you old drunk? I'm actually surprised they didn't kick me out sooner. He shook his head, clearing his mind. Never mind that. Do you mind if we stay for a while? I mean, if it's not too much trouble. Suna nodded, looked between the two blondes. Sure, sure. And of course, your little girlfriend here can stay, too. Nar blushed at the thought and waved his arms in defense. She's not my girlfriend. Please, who would date this idiot? Yugito gestured towards the ex-Konohan. He's reckless. Gets into more trouble than anyone I've ever met and is a pervert. If it wasn't for the fact that he saved my life, I would have gladly remained in Kumo instead of staying with him on this crazy ride. You don't have to be so forceful about it, Yugo. Nar grumbled under his breath, turning away in a huff. Tuna eyes them for a few moments before dragging out his words. Oh, I see my mistake then. Shaking his head, he gestured towards the nearby lake. Come on, you can both live at my place. Inari, dinner's ready, yelled a female voice from the house's kitchen. I'll be right there, Mom. A young boy of 11 yelled back, dashing down the stairs. Once he entered the kitchen, he sat on one of the chairs at the table. So, what are we having today? You'll find out in a minute, Tsunami answered cheerfully. Inari nearly gagged and groaned out. Mom, can we please go out to the dock to eat or something? He wed. It looked like the woman's eyes were glowing red. Are you saying my cooking is bad? She asked dangerously. Inari waved his hand in defense. No, 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 no. I just thought you might want to do something different. He laughed nervously as he saw his mother's gaze settle. That was a close one. He looked around, taking notice of his grandfather's absence. Where's Grandpa? I thought he'd be here by now. Tsunami looked over the stove to see how it was doing as she answered. He should be home anytime now. You know how hard he works these days. The boy sighed at that. I know, but I barely get to see him anymore. Suddenly, the doorbell went off, alerting to the two. Would you get that, Inari? His mother asked. The boy nodded, standing up and moving towards the door. Taking a look out the peephole, he immediately recognized his grandfather and opened the door. When he did, he took notice of the two blonde teenagers at the door with his grandfather. He looked between the two and Tuna before his eyes widened as he recognized 6 scar-like birthmarks on the male teen's face, knowing that only one person had them. Narison, Inari stuttered and heard a clatter of dishes from back in the kitchen. Suddenly his mother appeared at his side too. Why, you're really here? Hey Inari, Tsunami-san. Long time no see. The Kitsun Sinan suddenly found himself tackled to the ground by the boy. Nissan. Inari shouted, trying to hold back a wave of tears. As if to answer Naruto's unasked question. Tuna spoke up. Ever since we got word about your exile, Inari has been worried sick about you. The male teenager nodded in understanding before pushing the kid off of him gently and crouching down onto one knee so that they were eye level. Come on now, I thought you weren't going to cry anymore. It's not very manly. You know, you do want to be manly, don't you? Sniffing slightly, Inari rubbed his eyes and nodded. Sorry about that, Nissan. Don't worry about it. Nar smiled, patting him on the shoulders, getting the young boy to calm down. He's good with kids, Yugo mused before she shook her head. What am I thinking? Why do I care? It's not like I like that idiot, even though she thought that she couldn't escape the feeling of warmth in her chest when she looked at the scene. Is this your girlfriend, Naruto? Tsunami asked with her attention on the come-nin. Yugo blushed at that and shook in frustration. I am not his girlfriend. She continued past them and entering the house angrily. Turning to her father, Tsunami asked as Naruto followed the blonde girl, what was that about? They have that sort of relationship, Tuzuna replied knowingly and entered the house. Love, hate, this should be interesting, the woman giggled and headed back to the kitchen. Huh, was the only thing Inari could say as he didn't understand what they were talking about. After about 10 minutes, the group could be found sitting around the kitchen table eating the seafood Tsunami had cooked, much to Inari's dismay. So, you two, what brings you here? Tuzuna asked before taking another bite out of his meal. Nar stopped for a moment to answer. We need a place to lie low for a bit to plan our next move. He waved his hands in defense. Don't worry, we won't be staying long. Just a day or two before anyone decides to come knocking. The town mayor merely shook his head. I never said you couldn't stay, kid. To hell with any ninja that come by. This is a proud country and we have unbreakable will because of you. I'll be damned if it's going to fall just because some ninja want to kill you. So stay as long as you want. Nar shook his head at that. Thanks, but it would be safer if we kept moving. Tuna sighed as his daughter handed him some sauce. Well, I'm sure you'll be glad to know Konoha has been getting hammered for the last month or so. Both Naruto and Yugo raised their heads at that. What do you mean? The Kumo nin asked. The aged man seemed surprised for a moment before he explained. After you were exiled, Kid waving about 4 other countries have withdrawn their alliances with Fire Country because of it. Suna chuckled deeply. Snow Country and Wind Country with their ninja village were the first to back out of the alliance. Both blondes widened at the information. Are you joking? Yugo found it hard to believe. The mayor just shook his head in a negative. No, I'm not. The political arena is a mess because of this whole ordeal. Like I said before, you've got half the elemental nations out looking for you, kid. Putting his head in his hands, Naruto sighed audibly and grumbled. Great. Just great. Yugito groaned loudly. Well, that complicates things a bit. After dinner, The group had sat down in the living room talking while Naruto had some of his shadow clones do the dishes and clean up, much to Tsunami's delight. The conversations ranged from news about the other countries to the family's day-to-day lives. As it turned out, Inari was attending the local school that was built since Wave Country had prospered so much. At the end of the evening, however, there was a small problem. "What do you mean we have to share a room?" Yugito damn near shouted and pointed at her partner. "Why do I have to share a room with this knucklehead?" Nar grumbled. And Suna answered, gesturing to the other room. "That is the only other room we have, and it's used as a storage room. So unless you want to sleep on some crates, then you'll have to share the guest room." The no-sen huffed and strolled into the room. "You have a strange taste in women, kid." The mayor shook his head. Nar waved his hand dismissively. "I thought we told you there's nothing going on between us. We're just traveling together." He made to follow her. "Stupid old drunk. Whatever you say, kid. Try not to be too noisy, will you?" "I do want to sleep tonight," Suna said after him teasingly. The god of Flash didn't respond, but judging by the blush on his face, it was clear that he heard what the man said. He shook himself and entered. The room was fairly standard and fortunately or unfortunately, depending on who you were, had 2 beds. Yugo had unhooked her gear, mostly supplies in her hooded cloak before dropping them on one of the beds closest to the bathroom door. Naruto didn't say a word as he hung up his trench coat on the nearby stand before dropping back on his bed, looking up at the ceiling. After a few moments, Yugito's voice penetrated the silence of the room. "We've been using rivers and streams to bathe for the last 3 months. I'm going to take a shower." He didn't need to look to tell she was glaring at him. "If you try to sneak a peek, I will castrate you." She disappeared into the bathroom soon after. When he heard the water in the show start to run, Naruto sat up and started looking around the room before his eyes landed on the spiral mark on the back of his right hand. He concentrated and in a flash of yellow light, his mother's sword appeared with its edge shining in the light. He didn't know how long he was staring at it for, but judging by the fact that he heard the water being turned off, it had to be more than half an hour. Yuo re-entered the room soon after with a towel wrapped around her. Another hung over her shoulder and another holding up her hair to dry. When she saw him staring at his new blade, she sat down beside him, letting her semi-dried hair out of its towel. "What are you doing?" He looked up at her, trying to find the words, I don't know what I'm supposed to fight for anymore. Back in Konoha, I fought because I had people to protect, but now he turned his gaze back to the sword he held. What good is a weapon if you have nothing to use it for? Yugo couldn't say anything to that, knowing that she hadn't really experienced complete loneliness her whole life and then discarded. She thought what it might have been like if she had led a life like he did and was saddened by the mere thought of it. She slipped away from him and unsealed her nightgown from a scroll. She put it on knowing he wasn't looking and discarded the towels in the nearby basket before sitting back down beside him. You'll have to find out the answer yourself. No one can do it for you, she gently whispers and nods towards the bathroom. Go take a shower or something. You can worry about this stuff later. Yeah, you're right. Nar stood and proceeded towards the bathroom. He stopped at the door and looked over his shoulder at her. Hey, Yugo. The Kumo nin looked up at him and asked, what is Nar? Thanks for coming with me on this trip. I'd be dead right now without you, he told her. He shook his head. Thanks for everything. He entered the bathroom a moment later, and after a few moments, the sound of running water filled the room. Yuto just stared at the place he stood, feeling her cheeks heat up and knowing it wasn't because of the warm climate. What is wrong with me? She shook herself and brought her hands up to her cheeks to cool them. I'm acting like a school girl. Damn it. I don't like him, but he just drives me insane. What's happening to me? Wave country to Zuna's house. Later that night, after everyone had fallen asleep, the sounds of a low sobbing could be heard. Hearing the same thing as he did during their travels, Nara woke to the sight of a dimly lit room with the only source of light being the moonlight shining through the gap in the window's curtains. Sitting up straight, Nar turned to where the sound was coming from, the other bed. It took a few seconds for his eyes to adjust to the darkness before he could see clearly that his room was curled up in the bed sheets, sweating heavily, appeared to be crying in her sleep. "Mother," she whispered between her sobs. Climbing out of bed, Nar approached and shook her. "Hey, Yugo, wake up." She shook from the contact and her eyes snapped open. "Are you all right? It looked like you were having a nightmare." She was breathing heavily, but she nodded. "I am fine, thank you." Nar looked skeptical as her breathing seemed to even out. "Do you want to talk about it?" Yugito wiped her eyes to get rid of the tears and nodded. I've had nightmares every night for as long as I can remember. I'm plagued by them. I usually just sleep in the same bed as Kurobe-sensei to settle my subconscious mind, but he's not here right now. Why didn't you tell me this sooner? I could have woken you up if you were having trouble sleeping. Asked the ex-Konohan. Yugo shook her head and looked away. I didn't trust you back then. I've always had issues with trusting people. Does this have something to do with your mom? She stiffened at his question. I don't mean to pry, but you were muttering about her in your sleep, Naruto said hastily so as to appease any anger she might have accumulated at him. She sighed and explained, meeting his gaze with a sorrowful expression. My mother, she was killed by a secret group of Kumo and that had gone rogue 10 years ago when I was 6, called the Blood Howlers. Nar watched as her face contorted in rage, sadness, and fright. They just came barging into our house and cut her in half right in front me. Nar rushed over and grabbed her, holding her to him, allowing her to let her new wave of tears to fall onto his nightwear. She buried her face into his chest, crying throughout the night until she fell asleep. He didn't say a word as he tucked her back into bed and covered her up. He sighed and made his way back into his own bed, knowing that he'd need his sleep as well. He rolled over so he was facing away from his roommate and looking up at the curtains. After about 10 minutes, however, he felt a presence enter his bed and hug him from behind. Why, Yugo? He asked, looking over his shoulder as she buried her face into the crunch of his neck. Thanks for waking me, Nar. She had fallen asleep. Nar didn't know what to do, but felt his own fatigue catching up with him and soon fell into unconsciousness also. Wave country to Zuna's house. The sun shone in through the window, illuminating the room, and Naruto groaned in, still feeling tired. The sound of a pair of chirping morning birds filled his ear, awakening him from his relaxing slumber. He groaned again, covering his still closed eyes and buried his face back into the pillow, trying to go back to sleep. However, he quickly opened his eyes when he felt something or someone shift along his chest. He looked down, having gotten used to the light, and saw a still asleep Yu-Gi-Oh with her head rest on his chest. He sighed and said softly, nudging her, Hey, wake up. Come on now. Her eyes fluttered open and she groaned, trying to get used to the sunlight. She looked up and said, Good morning. Morning, he said back with a smile. She lowered her head. I'm sorry about last night. It's just remembering what happened to Mai. Don't worry about it, he told her with a smile. If it helps, I know how you feel. Just then she remembered he had met his mother or at least her clone only to lose her the same day. It's not fair, she whispered. Life isn't fair. I know that better than anyone. That he told her. She looked up at him and said, Nari. Sadly, she was interrupted by a knock at the door. Knock knock. Just then the door opened, allowing Suna to enter. Hey, you two, I need to talk to you both for a minute. The mayor stood there looking at them for a few moments before turning and saying quickly. Clearly I caught you at a bad time. Sorry for disturbing you. He closed the door on his way out. The two blondes looked at each other, then took notice that they were both still the same bed, dressed in their bedwear. You misunderstand. Nar called after the man as Yugo said something along the lines of pervert while blushing madly. Kuyo's no jutsu. Nar stood in a clearing away from prying eyes. There was a poof of smoke as Nar completed his jutsu, signifying the appearance of a summoned creature. What appeared from the smoke was a medium-sized summoned toad sitting atop a large vertical scroll. Who summons me? The toad asked, looking around before he spotted Nar standing before him. Namikaze Uzumaki Nar, the blonde answered, stating his full name as he looked up at the toad atop the scroll. He stared up and continued, I was told you could help me. I'm trying to contact the key toad. Are you the key toad? The toad remained silent for a few moments as he seemed to analyze the blonde teenager and took note of style of coat he wore. The toad nodded before speaking quietly, I am the holder of the key. My name is Garatora. I must say it has been a long time since we have last seen each other. Genturiki of the Kabi no Kutsum. That term no longer applies to me. Juro-san. Kobe's consciousness is no longer inside the seal. Nar corrected. Juro chuckled. True enough, but the seal is still there, as is the Kobe's chakra core in power. Nar just nodded hesitantly. Sahi continued, may I ask what you want with the key? And I, Naren, just call me Nar, and as for the key, I was told that you were given it, and I would like you to give it to me so I can complete the seal on my stomach. Nar answered truthfully. Number key, Toad answered plainly and continued before he could protest. The last time someone used the key to tamper with your seal, 4 tails of power were released and you lost all control. But Nar stuttered. No buts. You're too young to be trying to tamper with such a thing as the seal. Garo reiterated, this isn't a game, Nar. If something were to go wrong, there's no telling what would happen. And if the seal is opened any further, then chances are that the Kobe's power would be released in massive amounts, probably resulting in a very large explosion. The Kitsen Senin remained silent for a moment before he looked straight up into the toad's eyes and spoke. Then test me. What did you say? Asked the key, to narrowing his eyes at the blonde. Test me, he said again. Jiraiya entrusted everything to you. If I were to test you, then you will either pass or die. Are you sure you want this? Go asked in complete seriousness. You will have to answer to the laws of the toads if we were to test you like this. I don't need to repeat myself. Do I? Nar phrased it like a question, but they could both tell it wasn't. Very well. Well, begin the trial of the summoner now. Though be warned, you can only do this once. Juro made a hand seal and suddenly the world around them went down. Anomaly, unknown location. Sleeping lightly with his feet up on his desk sat one Namikaze Uzumaki Naruto, snoring loudly. There was a knock at the door, waking the man from his slumber, and he groggy opened his eyes. They immediately snapped open, seeing the room he was in. He looked around, seeing he was in Konoha, and more specifically the Hogue's office. The door opened slightly and a voice called out, "Can I come in?" Hokage-sama. Nar looked around for a second, unsure of what to say before he spoke up, a tad nervous. "Hiya, come on in." The door opened fully and allowed a man the blonde identified immediately as Uchiha Sasaki. Sorry to disturb you, Sama, but the council has scheduled another general meeting later today in case Sakura didn't mention it. I think someone who can't save their best friend isn't fit to become Hokage. What do you think, Sasaki? Every instinct in Naruto told him what was happening around him was wrong, but he played anyways, seeing as he had no idea what was happening. Yeah, I think she forgot. Are you feeling all right, Dabi? You seem a little pale today. I would have thought you'd have gotten used to being Hokage by now. Sasaki smirked before continuing. Or is it you're still thinking about your honeymoon last month with Sakura? Honeymoon? What the hell is going on here? The blonde looked up at him and shook his head. No, it's not that right. The Uchiha smirked again and turned to leave. He was just about to move before he cast a look over at the seated blonde. I never did thank you for saving me from Orochimaru, did I? Yeah, well, it's over now. He told the dark-haired young man. Before he left, however, Naruto spoke up once more. You know, I can't seem to remember how I saved you, and I don't know why. Are you losing your memory or something, Dabi? Surely you remember how. Sasaki seemed to have gone mute for a second, even though his lips were moving. I must thank you for what you did for. Suddenly, he was gone. Almost as if he disappeared instantly. Pain suddenly flared throughout Naruto's body and his head fell to the desk as he gasped. The ground seemed to rumble and the desk suddenly disappeared, letting him fall forward onto the floor. He squeezed his eyes shut as the entire office seemed to collapse around him. And for some reason, he could feel incredibly hot, like he was caught in a fire. Your eyes of a chakra far fouler than my own. It reminds me of Uchiha Madara. His eyes snapped open as the pain finally stopped. He got up off of the ground and saw that he was outside on what appeared to be a battlefield littered with dead bodies. He gave the bodies a quick look before nearly vomiting. They were all burnt beyond recognition, while others looked like they had been ripped and cut apart. What the hell is going on around here? He asked, but no one was nearby. Just then, he heard a monstrous roar, and he looked towards its source on the horizon. His eyes widened as he saw what looked like the Kyobi roar at a man dressed in samurai armor carrying a scroll standing atop a pillar of wood. Atop the fox's head stood another in samurai armor, but this one had red eyes that the blonde easily identified as the Sharingan. His face looked to be an older version of Sasaki with his hair much longer, and Naruto couldn't help but shiver at the look of pure insanity in his eyes. Hashiyama, the Sharing wielder, screamed in rage as the fox roared again. Mater. The man on the pillar shouted back and made a hand seal, causing pillars of wood to rise from the ground around them. Kubiko. The giant fox started charging what appeared to be a mass of chakra at its mouth and condensing it into a solid sphere. Amari. The fox roared again, and suddenly in a blinding flash of light, the ball exploded towards Hashiyama. Promise of a lifetime, Naruto shielded his eyes from the light until it died down. But now, instead of seeing the Kyobi, Matera, and Hashiyama like he expected, he now saw a large valley with two statues standing at the waterfall upstream. Looking down, he saw two figures standing at the statues' feet. And he knew exactly even at the range he was at. They were Nar and Sasaki back when they were 13 and fighting in this same valley. The two had their gifts activated and were charging their most powerful attacks, readying for the final clash. Then it came. They both jumped high and stretched their arms out in the hope of beating the other. Chidori Razan. Those were the sounds he heard as he saw the two attacks connect with each other before expanding in a ball of darkness which then exploded in a shining white light. I don't want to see this. Nar whispered with his fist shaking at the scene. He looked up and shouted out. Stop this. Do you have someone precious to you? Nar whirled around at the voice, but noticed that no one was there. He turned back and saw that the valley was gone, and now he was in a large black void with no life sight. What is it you believe in? Nar snapped his head in the direction of the voice and again saw nothing. That voice. What is it you're fighting so desperately for? This time the voice came from behind him and he suddenly felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned his head to the right and looked over at the one with their hand on his shoulder. His eyes widened slightly as he recognized who it was and was unable to say anything to him. When a person has something important they want to protect, that's when they can become truly strong, Haku said with a smile. Haku, why are you? Nar began. You should wake up. You'll catch a cold if you sleep on the ground, Haku said, still smiling. Before Nar could speak, the entire world around him was encased in a blinding light. Wave Country Training Field. Nar let out a groan as Groggy opened his eyes. Just then, he remembered all of the stuff he had seen and immediately bolted up into a sitting position. The first thing he noticed was that night had already descended on the land and the moon was out in full. Oh, good, you're awake. I thought you were going to die for a second there. He snapped his head to the left and saw Jir sitting on top of his scroll a few feet away. You mean that was all a genjutsu? Nar asked, shaking himself to clear the images from his mind. Not exactly. It's more of a form of sulurching. It basically portrayed all of the emotions you have ever felt directly into your consciousness, the key toad answered. What would have happened if I hadn't woken up? The blonde asked, shooting the toad a look. You'd be dead, kiddo. Go said simply. Nar nodded and climbed to his feet. Right. So what now? The scroll suddenly flung open and wrapped around him. What the heck? He fell to the ground as Jir jumped off. What is this? The key was all the toad said as the kanji on the scroll merged with the seal on Nar. There was a stream of light that appeared between the toad's abdomen and the scroll. But it died down quickly. It is done. There was a sudden rush of wind as massive amounts of red chakra erupted from Naruto's body. It soon engulfed him and he was only able to let out a small scream before the chakra took on the shape of a fox with 4 tails. His skin was ripped apart and blood mixed with the chakra condensing it further. Once it was over, Jir looked on worriedly. Nar, are you all right? Never been better, came the answer from the 4-tailed fox as he flexed his hands. No claws. A moment later, he let shut it down and returned to normal breathing. A sigh of relief. Well, that was interesting. Yeah, it also looks like your healing factor has been enhanced as well. The Kita commented, seeing that the blonde still had most of his skin and the rest was healing before his eyes. Thank you for everything. Nar for the first time in his life bowed his head in respect. The toad just waved his hand dismissively. You don't need to thank me, kiddo. Giordano would have wanted you to have the key. Nar looked confused, catching the toad's choice of words and asked, what are you talking about? What do you mean would have wanted? Did something happen? Jiro looked at him sadly for a few moments before explaining, you haven't heard, have you? Jerihono fell in battle against the Akatsuki leader 2 days ago. At those words, for the first time in 5 months, Naruto had felt true pain once again. Rain Country, AIM Akatsuki headquarters. I trust all of you are aware of the GMA Sinan. Jera recently infiltrating a Megakure Pain, the leader of Akatsuki said, looking around the room at the numerous holograms of the other members. When they all nodded knowingly, Pain continued. Both myself and Conan intercepted and defeated him. Though the battle did last longer than I would have liked. Kisame let out a laugh he had been stifling for the last few minutes before finally speaking. That guy must have been something to hold off against 2 of Akatsuki's strongest alone. Pain remained silent before he spoke again. Jera was once my sensei, and if he had prior knowledge of Conan and I, we would have surely lost. Itachi nodded at that, knowing the strength Pain wielded. Almost like a god. Moving on to more pressing issues. Itachi. Zetsu spoke up, getting the Sharingan wielder's attention. Your brother has killed Orochimaru and is hunting for you as we speak with his new team he's made. Itachi remained silent at the news, but Kisame just grinned and seemed to shoulder his sword. The shark man spoke in a challenging voice. Let the brat come. I'll be sure to cut off one of his limbs. The Uchiha to his side, however, shook his head and stated, Sasuke is insignificant. I will deal with him personally. Didor looked over at the Akatsuki leader and asked, with all due respect, Leader Sama, what do we do about the Kale, Nibi, and the Hibi? Yeah, the Hibi can wait. It has a village to defend it and will not be easy to capture. That leaves the Kaobi and the Nibi. Pain narrowed his eyes with thought before looking up at them once again. Dara, Hedon, Zetsu, Tobi. You are to hunt the Kaobi and the Nibi together so they cannot get away this time. The group nodded, though in both Dara and Hedon's cases reluctantly, with Tobi beaming brightly in the background and Zetsu looking bored off to the side. Yes, Leader Sama. The three spoke together, but in Toba's case, Tobi is a good boy. Note, seriously, that guy has issues. Fire Country, Konoha, Hogue's office. Despite the heartache and pain from losing the closest person she had ever had, Senjusanad sat at her desk, constantly fighting down the large number of tears threatening to form in her eyes. To the side next to the window sat the Toad elders. Fukusaku and Shima, though Fukusaku appeared to have no readable emotion on his face. In front of her stood the Konoha 11 minus Naruto, Asuma, Kakashi, and Yamato, who appeared to be very saddened at the news they had heard. For some, it was for no other reason than the fact that they heard possibly one of the strongest people they had ever encountered had been defeated and killed by one of his own student. For others, it was the fact that the man had been with them for a short while, and though the girls hated his perverted nature, respected him for the strength he had wielded. But for most, it was the fact that they all knew Naruto wouldn't take this news lying down. Thankfully, some good news has come to us as well, Tsunade said, getting their attention. It appears from Jiraiya's last Toad mail that Orochimaru was killed by Sasaki and he is now going after his brother, Itachi, she explained. So, he's not returning? Sakura said as a statement more than a question. The Hokage shook her head before continuing. No, he's not. From the window, Fukusaku spoke up, catching their attention. I'm afraid the Toads cannot be allied with Konoha any longer, since the only one my son Gamabuna will accept as a summoner is that blonde boy. And since he is exiled from here, as Toads no longer have any attachments to this place. Everyone in the room looked shocked at the elder Toad, though he merely nodded towards Sun. Once we leave here, it will be for the last time, Hokage Dono. The blonde woman clenched her fists, knowing that the last of Jiraiya she had would be gone after the Toad elders left, just like she had lost everything of Nar. Before she could utter a response, there was a sudden poof of smoke and a medium-sized red-black toad appeared in the office. Ha! The Toad exclaimed upon seeing Fukusaku. Settle down, Kichichi-chan. Shima calmed the young Toad. But Ma, I just got back from talking with the key Toad. This surprised both Ma and Pa, though everyone else in the room heard. Apparently Nar now has the key and has used it. He explained further. Is there any danger from the containment seal? Fukusaku asked, alarmed. The key appears to have restored the seal to its original design, but that's not why I'm here. Gamakichi spoke quickly. I came to tell you that Naruto knows about Erozan being killed. Apparently, Garo Toro-sama told him and Nar destroyed everything in sight because of it. Fukusaku asked in a serious voice, where is he now? Hunting the Akatsuki leader. I think he's heading for Rain Country, though he should be passing the edge of Fire Country to get there, the Toad Prince answered truthfully. Sasaki will have to take that route too if he wants to locate his brother. Shino commented in monotone. Shisho Sakura Askadune nodded. I know all of you are to head out after Naruto and Sasaki. Though be careful if and when you confront them. I doubt they will come quietly. Understatement. Kakashi muttered, remembering his last skirmish with his former blonde student. Fire Country Forest. Naruto and Yugito rode on Sukino's back at high velocity through the large forest en route to Rain Country. And though Yugito hadn't said anything, she was deeply worried about her traveling companion. He had returned to the house back in Wave Country with his cloth drenched in his own blood and his skin healing faster than it did before. None of the others saw him when he came in, but she did. He was angry. No, that's not true. He was downright pissed off. When he came in, he told her to pack her things and that they were leaving after he took a shower. When asked why, he just said that his former teacher had been killed and he was going after the one responsible. They had said their goodbyes to the family before he summoned Sukino and they took off towards Rain, only stopping to rest, eat, and drink. That had been a week ago, and they were just now passing the edge of Fire Country. During that time, Naruto had barely spoke throughout the entire trip, and she was becoming increasingly worried about him with each passing moment. Hey, Naruto, maybe we should stop to rest. Yugo spoke up, getting his attention. We won't be in any shape to fight if we keep moving like this. He looked at her over his shoulder and noticed that she looked fatigued from the continuous travel. He sighed before nodding in agreement. All right, Sukino. Sniff out the nearest town and take us there. The fox nodded lightly and changed its course slightly. After another 10 minutes, they emerged from the forest onto a small grass field with what appeared to be a town on the other side of it. Sukino dashed across the field before coming to a stop just outside town. The fox gave one look at the two as they dismounted. It's probably not a good idea to have you carry us into the village from here, Sukino-chan. So, well, head on foot the rest of the way, Naruto told her. Sukino nodded with a smile. Summon me when you need me, Naruto-kun. Yugo-chan. By Yugo waved as the fox poofed away. When she turned to her blonde companion, she noticed he was already heading into the town street. Hey, Nar, wait up, she called after him, but he just kept walking as if he hadn't heard her. Nar, she clenched her fists before taking off after him. Can I help you? The receptionist at the local inn asked in greeting. Yes, we'd like a room, please, just for the one night, Nar answered, and the woman nodded with a smile. That will be note. I have no idea how Japanese currency works. Nar handed her the money and she took it before handing him the keys to the room. Have a nice day. As the two sen made their way towards their room, Yugito asked him, where did you get that kind of money? You're not a part of any village now, even if you are still a ninja, so you aren't getting paid. It's something I have left over from my training trip with Erozan. Naruto answered. Erozan? Yugo asked, confused by the title. The Gamma Senia. Nar answered, and she noticed his features tense before relaxing. He was the teacher you used to have that was killed. The Nico Sinan asked as the two came to a stop in the hall. Yeah, Nar answered with barely controlled rage showing in his eyes. He was like a grandfather to me, a perverted one, but still someone I held dear, said the Kitsen Sinan. Yuto noticed this, of course, and said, Nar, you shouldn't try to bottle up your emotions like this. I know that, but I can't just sit around and let that bastard from Akatsuki get away with this. Nar tried not to yell knowing they were in a hotel, but that didn't mean he didn't get his point across. I'll kill him and anyone else stupid enough to get in my way. He calmed himself and shook his head before turning to continue. Nar, please don't let your anger conjure. Yugito started only to stop when she was handed the keys. Go on ahead. I need to go blow off some steam. I'll be back later. The next moment, Nar was gone in several flashes of yellow light indicating the number of flash steps he used. The Kumo Nin looked down at the hallway towards where the last flash originated. Nar, the god of flash, walked through the crowded streets of the town, trying to locate the source of his unease. Ever since he had left Wave Country, he had been feeling a presence, for lack of a better term, like there was something following them, or at least moving with them in the same direction, and it was beginning to frustrate him. Suddenly, he felt a spike of chakra from far away and almost instantly snapped his head in its direction. They must have been waiting for us, Nar thought, and set off walking towards the source of the chakra spike. Nar silently walked through the crowd until he emerged from the town and continued onto the open field outside. Once he got to a hill near the center of the field, he looked over his shoulder and held out his hand to the side. His coat flapped in the wind as he whispered the words, "Come out." An object he recognized as a red three-bladed scythe erupted from the ground, trying to catch him. It cut deep, but that made no differences. Nar disappeared in a poof of smoke, indicating it was a clone. "Damn, I forgot clones are your specialty, brat," Hedden said from a few feet away as he pulled on the chain attached to his side. He looked over his shoulder, noticing the blonde was a few feet away, and said in a crazed voice, "Pray to Jash and Sama. That you can kill me first or you will die." "Where is Pain?" Naro asked. "Lykel," Hedden said as his smile widened. A bird made out of clay appeared behind the blonde and flew towards him at high speed. "Richu," there was a whisper before a ball of lightning fell from the sky and hit the clay bird. It fell lifeless to the ground a moment later as Yuto touched down behind Naruto. So they were back to back. "Sorry I'm late." "Don't worry about it," the Kitsun Sinan told her as he saw the person who defeated Gar was riding atop a large dragon made of clay. Dara was his name if he remembered it correctly. "Oh great, it's the gender-confused weirdo who kidnapped Gar that one time." "I am not a gender-confused weirdo." "Yeah," the bomber shouted in rage at the insult, though Hedden appeared to be barely holding in his laughter. "Hello, do you see Toby?" The two senin looked over to see a man wearing an Akatsuki cloak and an orange mask. He waved almost childishly, getting their attention. "Toba's over here, quote, comma. Seriously, what is that guy smoking?" "Yeah," Dara asked, but Hedden just shrugged at the question. "How the hell should I know?" "He's your partner," said the human reaper. Sage mode activated. The ground shook as both Naruto and Yugito shifted into their respective forms, releasing a small shock wave around them with a loud roar. Their now slitted eyes were shifting between the three Akatsuki members. And as he saw this, Dara couldn't help himself. "This will be a blast." "Yeah." The bomber shook with anticipation. Yugujito cast her partner look and saw that his eyes were seemingly glued to the dragon rider above them. Flashback no jutsu begin. "I'll kill him and anyone else stupid enough to get in my way." He calmed himself and shook his head before turning to continue down the corridor. Flashback. No jutsu and Nar. The no Sinan trailed on in thought. A sudden explosion shook the area and the two sen separated from each other's sides. Nar skidded to a halt a few feet away only to jump out of the way of another exploding clay bomb that had took the form of a bug. Once in midair, Nar watched as Dara's clay dragon seemed to spat out a volley of small chunks of clay that looked to be homing in on the Kitsun Sen. "Damn it, I can't shuna in midair." Nar growled in thought as he brought his arms up over his chest as a shield. "Futon. Rosin," he whispered, and a plate of a spinning chakra formed in front of him. The projectiles exploded harmlessly on the chakra shield, and Nar touches back down on the ground again, glaring up at the bomber. "Where's Pain?" It was a demand, not a question. Dara just scoffed. "Sorry, not telling. It's a secret." "Yeah, can Toby play too?" Nar looked over his shoulder and saw the orange-masked Akatsuki member staring at him questionably with his said head cocked to the side. Though he didn't know what had caused it at the time, at that moment, Namikaze Uzumaki Naro could not help himself but be consumed by his anger. He attacked. Yugito sat atop a large one-tailed cat with comparable size to Sakino, and together they dashed across the open field. Now Ray, fire! Yugo shouted as she saw the man chasing her move closer. I hear you, the cat. Rai muttered in annoyance before suddenly skidding to a stop while turning. Nekomata, she called out and launched a giant bolt of purple flames at the Akatsuki member. There was a sudden explosion as it connected, but that didn't mean they had won. You can't run this time, girlie. Hedon appeared in front of the two in a single moment. By the will of Jashin-sama, I will kill you. Before he could land the hit, Ray used her tail to throw her passenger off before disappearing back to the summoned realm in a poof of smoke. Hedon growled and turned, but was knocked off balance by an impact from the side. He looked down and instead of a kunai like he had expected, he saw an arrow. He looked up at the no Sennin and just saw her standing there with a bow in her hands aimed at him. She lowered her weapon and smirked. Hi, no ya, she said barely above a whisper, and the arrow suddenly exploded in his side. Got you, Yugito whispered again, seeing his now unmoving body on the ground, still relatively intact. She thought she had finished him with that last hit and slowly took a step towards him. When she got close enough, however, she wasn't able to dodge the moving scythe coming at her from the side. It slashed her face from the side, and by the will of its attached chain, the scythe returned to its wielder's hand. Did you really think something like that would kill me? Hedon asked, standing up, showing the large hole in his side. I had hoped, she admitted. Hedon just grinned and began to create a symbol on the ground around him using his own blood. I hope you enjoyed life because you were about to be judged by Jashin-sama. Just then, the skin on his body changed color into something reminiscent of a grim reaper. Fire Country Plain Ringon Nar called out as he lunged at the masked Akatsuki member. What the hell? He asked, startled as he appeared to phase right through him. The blonde skidded to a stop a few feet away and looked at the man's orange mask. What's going on here? I know I landed that hit, but it did no damage. Come play with Toby. The Akatsuki member gestured for the blonde to come at him. Naruto's eyes begun to shift in color from blue to red as he glared at Toby. He made a hand seal and muttered, Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. 20 clones appeared at his side and charged towards the Akatsuki member at full speed. I have to thank the Rockage for this jutsu next time I see him. Yay. More friends, Toby waved. Bunchan Dabakua. The clones called out once in range and exploded with tremendous forces. Toby emerged from the smoke completely unharmed and looked around, unable to find the Kitsen-sen. Where'd you go, mister? Here came a voice from behind him. He turned swiftly and was completely unprepared for the long double-edged sword that struck at his chest. I'll ask again, where's Pain? This sword, Toby said, losing his childish demeanor. As a transcended sword, and so cannot be blocked by thing you're using to deflect my attacks, Naruto told him as he twisted the blade. Now answer the question, or believe me, you won't like what I'll do. Toby didn't reply as he suddenly started to shrink into his Akatsuki cloak until it disappeared too. What the hell? Where did he go? Nar asked, looking around for the masked Akatsuki member. You still have me to contend with. Yeah, Durera shouted from his clay dragon as he launched another volley. Would you stop dropping bombs on me already? Nar shouted in frustration and anger as he dodged the barrage. Die. Yeah, was Dara said as he launched another salvo of clay bombs. I've had enough of this. I think it's about time I tried out that new jutsu I salvaged from Whirlpool Country. Nar muttered darkly with his eyes now fully red. He made a hand seal and 3 shadow clones appeared at his side. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. He held out both of his hands and 2 of the clones went to one of them while the last went to the other. The two clones standing at one side begun to insert chakra and wind manipulation into a contained sphere in the palm of his hand, while the last clone drew on the water in the neighboring to spin it in the palm of his other hand. Futon Rasen Sweden Hahenryu Suika no Jutsu. The original Naruto called out as he brought both of the jutsu together into a new one. A large spinning wall of water exploded from the contact, putting a swirling barrier of water and wind between the two fighters. "What is this?" Deidara shouted in rage as he saw his bombs detonate harmlessly on the water vortex. Futon Rasenshuriken Dara turned swiftly, seeing the giant chakra wind shuriken flying at him at high speed. Yeah, the bomber said through gritted teeth as he jumped off of his clay dragon. The chakra shuriken sailed past the dragon and continued on towards him. It narrowly missed as Dara fell towards the ground, but just then the recent detonated, catching his arm. His arm was ripped apart, completely destroying it and making him pain from the attack. Once he touched down on the ground again, he glared over at his opponent. "You'll pay for that, yeah," the bomber shouted as he returned to his feet. Despite his words, Deidara knew he couldn't win a prolonged fight against him and so decided to not hold back. "I was hoping to get the chance to use this against Itachi, but you'll do for a good test subject." Yeah, he pulled out a large mass of clay and ate it with his normal mouth. "You had better pray, demon, because you die here and now." Yeah. He vomited out a large mass of clay which expanded and Nar jumped away before taking a look up at the towering giant. Oh crap, it was a Nendo Bunshin clay clone of Dara. Nothing really new about that since Nar had seen him make them before. But now, this wasn't a regular clone. The thing was massive, easily 50 feet tall, if not taller. And if Nar remember correctly, this particular type of clone had a tendency to explode. If that thing explodes right now, it might kill me. I'm not sure if the Renin can take that kind of a blast. Naruto's breathing suddenly seemed to become ragged. He turned sharply and stepped as far away as he could. "I've got to get away. Shuna no Jutsu. You can't escape my art." Yeah, Deidara shouted from the air. "Let me introduce you to C4 Kurakitu." The large clone suddenly seemed to disintegrate until nothing was gone. Nar stopped on a nearby tree and looked back. What the hell happened? I thought it was supposed to explode. He could suddenly feel a large amount of impacts against his barrier as the protective barrier began to flare into sight. What's hitting the Rankin? Are those bombs? Die. Yeah, the bomber shouted, riding atop his clay dragon once again. Damn it. They must be some form of very small clay bombs. I can't stop them all from getting through the Rankin, though. The Renin seemed to become visible under the constant barrage. My healing factor is dealing with the bombs that get through the Rankin, but it's not working fast enough. It was true. His skin was being blown apart as well as his internal organs, and because of his advanced healing, he was able to keep going. Sadly, the damage was beginning to exceed the healing rate, and his skin was being blown apart faster than it could heal. If the Renin fell, then he would be dead in moments and he knew it. Come on, I need a way out of this. Think. Damn it. Think. The Kitsen Sinan yelled in thought, still feeling his defense being continuously hit. His eyes suddenly flashed in recognition. Of course, if I add the wind element, then the Renin will be able to shred the bombs at the cellular level just like the futon. Recentric does. He concentrated and suddenly there was a continuous low-pitched screech as he called out, "Futon." Riankin. From that moment on, none of the miniature bombs were able to get past his barrier. Deidara was getting frustrated when he saw that Naruto was no longer taking damage. However, Deidara noticed that the ex-Konohan was breathing harder than before while he tried to keep his barrier up as long as possible, even going as far as to tap into his Sage Mode's chakra supply to maintain it at full power. After another minute and 23 agonizing seconds of this, the last of the bombs were destroyed, and Naruto dropped to the ground, panting hard with sweat rolling down his face. Deidara saw that his eyes had returned to normal and knew that the Kitsen Sen's Sage mode was now out of power. I was expecting you to die. Yeah, the bomber said more as a statement than anything else. Sorry to disappoint you, Naruto back, still trying to catch his breath. Your barrier is down, though, and it looks like that power of yours is out of juice as well. Yeah, Dara grinned, amused. He's right. Sage mode has shut down and I don't know how to get it back right now. The futon Rankin drained almost all of my chakra. How the hell do I win this? Nar suddenly heard a shout and looked up. See a swarm of clay birds descending towards him. Oh crap. He quickly made some quick hand seals and inhaled a large breath of air. Futon Dappa. He blew out the air in a blast of wind, using up all of his remaining chakra in the process, though it proved to be enough as it deflected or destroyed the oncoming swarm. That's it. I'm spent. You have to be running out of chakra by now. Yeah, it was an innocent question, but the way the bomber said it was almost crazed. Nar gulped and thought, what do I do now? Flashback. No jutsu begin. The toad nodded before speaking quietly. I am the holder of the key. My name is Juro. I must say it has been a long time since we have last seen each other. Genturiki of the Kalobi no Kitsum. That term no longer applies to me. Juro-san. Kaobi's consciousness is no longer inside the seal. Nar corrected. Juro chuckled. True enough. But the seal is still there as is the Kaobi's chakra core in power. Flashback. No jutsu. End. Naruto's eyes flashed in remembrance. Oh yeah, I forgot I still have the furball's chakra core stuffed in my gut. He grinned before he began to concentrate on accessing that particular energy source. I have to remain in control or this won't work. What are you smiling at? Yeah, nothing you do will change the outcome of this fight. Yeah. Dara eyes bore down on the ex-Konoha nin, but Nar just glared back. For the record, I would have kicked you the first time if Kakashi hadn't stopped me. Nar finished and suddenly red chakra exploded from his body. Note, I'm sure some of you know I got this line from Halo Wars. It soon wrapped around his body and Dara was forced to guide his clay dragon further away, a spiraling column of red light. The chakra encased Nar in a barrier of red, taking the shape of a fox with one tail and then a second tail formed. Then another and another until a total of 4 tails had formed. Nar let out a silent scream as his skin was ripped apart from the intense power running through and across him. The blood mixed with the chakra and suddenly Naruto's body was no longer seen. A large shock wave erupted from his position and flattened everything within a 5 meters radius. In the center, there was only a crimson chakra fox with his face covered in a black mask with pure white eye and a seemingly glowing mouth. Well, this just got a lot harder. Yeah, the fox roared. Fire Country Forest. The Konoha retrieval team jumped from tree to tree in search of their missing comrades with Hinata and Ka leading them with their respective abilities. Suddenly, Yumoto stopped on one of the branches and snapped his head towards the distant tree to his left. He turned his gaze to his hand, feeling a small but noticeable sting and saw that smoke drifted off of it. What's wrong? Ha asked the Anbu captain. It's Nar. He just released 4 tails of Kaobi's chakra, Yumoto informed them in a desperate voice. I thought you put another seal on him to stop that from happening, Kakashi stated. I did, but for some reason it's not working, Yumoto answered hurriedly. Can you track him? The copy nin asked and Yumoto nodded in reply. All right then, let's move, he said as an order. Follow me, said Yumoto as he took off in the direction he had been looking towards. Fire Rain Country border. Now I can finally savor the pain your death will cause. Hedon laughed as he drew his weapon back, readying to stab himself. Say hello to Jash and Sama for me, girly. He shouted before stabbing himself through the chest. Yugito's eyes widened as she remained standing motionless for a few seconds before dropping to her knees and then falling down until she lay on the cold ground. Hedon sighed in satisfaction as he pulled the scythe from his chest. Ah, now that hit the spot, he walked confidently over to the fallen woman's body as he hefted up his weapon onto his shoulder. Was it good for you? Not really, she said as she bolted to her feet and dashed towards him. He stood shocked that she was still alive for a moment before getting his bearings again, but it was already too late. Kuki, she knocked the Akatsuki member's chain-wielded weapon out of the way with one flame-covered arm and flung out her other arm towards the man's chest. Soon Kazuki, she called out as she pierced the man and cleaved off the arm that held onto the chain. She pulled away before he could counterattack and kicked him in the chest, knocking him back. I got you. How are you still alive? I know I cut you. I had your blood, so how did you escape my curse? Hedon shouted his fury at her, clutching his missing arm. Yugito grinned and answered, I'm a girl of many talents. One of which is while in my cat sage mode I become the direct servant of Shinigami-sama, and as such he will not allow you to curse me while I'm in this form. Hedon let out a low growl of anger under his breath as he glared at her. You really think you've won? He suddenly started laughing madly, almost crazily at her fool. This is getting interesting. He rolled to the left and picked up the chain connected to his scythe. I'm going to kill you, girly. Ha. If Yuga were to be truly honest with herself, she would say that she was scared. No, terrified of the man she was facing. He had taken everything she had thrown at him and just kept going. Hell, the guy didn't even look bothered by the amount of damage she had inflicted on his body. Yet this man, this demon appeared to have just shrugged off the wounds like they were paper cuts and seemed to keep coming at her. Yes, she was truly scared of him, if only for that simple reason. Stay away from me, she shouted as purple chakra erupted from her body and spiraled around her. Her body was ripped apart under the constant heat and the chakra became purple flames. The flames suddenly took the shape of a large cat made out of fire and with two swishing tails behind her. She let out a loud roar at the Akatsuki member which was reminiscent of a tiger's. She flung her large fire claw at her and a wave of flames erupted from the tips. Hi, Nami. The fire cat growled out as the flames became brighter. Now this is more like it. Hedon shouted as he dodged the large waves of fire coming at him. Hold still, the cat growled and began forming a ball of what appeared to be concentrated heat and flames at her open mouth. Nekama Guakyu. The ground shook as the fireball was shot towards Hedon and exploded in a glorious display of light. Once it died down, the landscape looked to have been leveled and there were a few patches of glass littering the smoking ground. Is that all you've got? I'm disappointed, came a voice from behind her, prompting the cat to turn swiftly. How did you survive that? Yugito growled at seeing the Akatsuki member standing at the edge of the nearby cliff, leaning on his side. I told you I'm immortal, he shot back with an insane grin. You. The fire cat charged towards him, intent on eating him alive. Hey, Hedon chuckled before he jumped high into the air above Yugo. The cat skidded to a stop as she neared the edge. She cast a look down while keeping an eye on her opponent and noticed that down the cliff was a large ravine. Hedon touched down on the opposite side of her and swung his side down on the ground, causing it to crack. Sonera, he said with a wave as the entire cliff edge collapsed and fell into the ravine with Yugo. She screamed as she touched to water as her flame body was instantly cooled and she emerged from the water in her humanoid form again. She glared up at the seemingly undying man even as he tells her, give up already, girly. You can't win. She climbed out of the water, so she stood on it and glared up at Hedon. Her cloak had been destroyed, and her clothes were dripping wet from the dive. Yugito quickly went through her options and knew her clothes would weigh her down if she were to fight the Akatsuki Reaper in close combat again. Thankfully for her, she noticed something when she had climbed out of the water that would allow her to still fight. Her Sage mode had been recharged. Deciding to take this